Okay, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about communicating with the funders from a HRB perspective. So as I'm sure, in terms of the talk itself, so my name is Fiona Manning. I'm the program manager for the Clinical Trials and Interventions portfolio within the HRB. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the clinical trials portfolio. And just to kind of say it at the start, when we talk about clinical trials, we talk about any study that involves an intervention in humans. So it's not just IMP trials, it's not just regulated trials. So it's really any trial that involves an intervention. And so our portfolio includes a scheme to support clinical trials themselves, but also clinical trials infrastructures. And again, just to kind of say at the start, so when we talk about infrastructures, we talk about funded services and expertise to enable support clinical research. So it's not physical buildings, but it's more the support and the expertise that's available to researchers. I'll talk a little bit then about pre-award communications and then post-award communications. And it's really timely for us actually because we've just introduced a new monitoring and evaluation framework for our clinical trial portfolio. So I'll talk a little bit about that and then end with some key messages. So as many of you will be aware, HRB acknowledges the importance of clinical trials and infrastructures in health innovation. And over the last 10 or 15 years, HRB has invested around 150 million euro in supporting clinical trials and infrastructures. So last year we had a round of funding and invested in the region of 55 million in clinical trials infrastructures. So these include 5 clinical research and facilities in UCD, UCC, Trinity, CHI, which is Children's Health, and Galway. And then aligned with this, we have a number of research trial networks, which are thematic. So they're specifically to support trials in defined areas. So these, the funding here supports the infrastructure, as in the supports and services, but it doesn't fund the individual trials within that. So it's very much a support network to support and facilitate trials in those areas. And those CTNs are collaborative, so they include a number of centres across Ireland. And then in support of these infrastructures, we have the TMRN, which everybody is very familiar with. And then we also have the National Clinical Trials Office, which is a central coordination office to support clinical trials across Ireland. So in line with these specific ones, we also have support infrastructures in cancer. So these support cancer-specific clinical trials groups, and we also have a coordination network to support the clinical trial groups. And we also run a specific scheme, which is the Definitive Intervention and Feasibility Awards, which supports clinical trials on healthcare interventions. And this is the only scheme funded publicly in Ireland to support trials. And we currently have one of those ongoing at the moment. Hopefully we'll get outcomes early next year for that. So in total, last year, we made an investment of 65 million over 5 years. And this is represents just the HRB side of it, but also for some of the infrastructures, the CRFs, the CTNs, the cancer groups. There's also a co-investment from partners. So this is really important for us because it helps to embed the research culture around clinical trials within the health service delivery side of things. Okay, so this may be obvious, but why is good communication important? Well, fundamentally, it acts as an information exchange between us as a funder and the research community. And what's really important to us, because grant applications have gone through a peer review process and they've been funded on the basis of a specific work program and a research team, it provides a mechanism to allow us to understand if there's any changes either to the work program or the composition of the team. And it then promotes us to kind of consider that and to undertake any action that may be required. It also allows us to monitor the performance of the award. So obviously we see the funding process as a partnership. So it's in our interest and we very much want grants to succeed. And we see it as a partnership, but fundamentally that the grants are awarded to carry out specific activities. So it's important for us to monitor that performance. It also allows us to gather intelligence. I mean, we very much see researchers at the coalface. We're a little bit removed from that. So it allows us to interact with the researchers and understand the system that they're working in. I think the system in Ireland is quite unique. So it's really important for us to understand what's happening, what are the challenges, and be part of developing solutions to that. And as I said before, we see funding as a partnership, and open and good communication helps us to build relationships with the researchers and the research community, because ultimately we do have a common goal, and ultimately we want the research to benefit patients. So again, it's really important for us to have good relationships, good open communication with the research community. So in terms of pre-award communication, I guess there's two ways of information flow. One is from the HRB as a funder to the research community. And we develop, so this is around informing people about what's coming up, what specifics of the grant calls are. So we would have an indicative call calendar for the year where we kind of lay out, I wouldn't say a rough, but kind of an indicative timeline for when calls will be announced and when the deadlines will be. It's can be flexible in terms of dates, but the calls each year would be set, but sometimes the dates, from lots of different reasons, the dates may change. So that's why we say it's indicative, but generally speaking, it's quite close to what the ultimate calendar would be. So we have an email alert, so we would encourage anybody who's interested in funding in HRB to sign up to e-alerts. You get information here about calls that are coming up, calls that are progressing, and calls that are planned in the future. Plus also other information about impact, case studies, news, everything that's happening in HRB. So when the calls open, then we obviously publish call guidance notes and FAQs to kind of give some background and some instruction to the applicants around what we're looking for, and how you should kind of pitch the story of your research grant. And then we run workshops and webinars, which are a little bit more personal in terms of specific calls. And we also signpost supports to some of the infrastructures like TMRN, where we encourage people to go and talk to them, to discuss their proposals, and to see how TMRN can help them. For example, if you're considering doing a SWOT, or if you're looking at core outcomes, those kind of issues, really important to engage with TMRN, and they can support you and help you with that. And then the other side of it is the communication between the research community and HRB. And a lot of that is queries that come from people who are considering applying, not sure if their idea kind of meets the criteria, or might have some questions about other parts of the studies and the call. So we encourage people to contact us with queries. We would suggest that your first port of call is your research office, because oftentimes if you have a question, somebody else has that question also, and they might direct it to the research offices, so the research offices may be able to help you. If not, then we're happy for you to contact us and ask us some queries. So the primary point of contact would be the project officers, and those details are always within the call guidance notes. So in terms of post-award communication, so if I take DIFA as an example, so this is the Definitive Intervention and Feasibility Awards. So this is the call that specifically supports clinical trials and intervention studies. So we will plan to have a workshop once the awardees have been notified, and that's really to start this open kind of communication process. We will be posting supports at that workshop, but hopefully at that point people have already engaged with them in terms with the support functions in terms of developing their proposal. At the meeting, so we would be really clear to the PIs and host institutions in terms of what our expectations are from them as awardees, and we refer them to the clinical trials policy, which is currently being updated. But this outlines our kind of requirements around research governance, around the conduct of trials and intervention studies, around things like sponsorship, and some of the mandatory requirements. We will also talk about the new kind of monitoring and evaluation framework, which is specifically designed for the monitoring and evaluation of our clinical trials portfolio. So it's unique to our portfolio. And this includes new revised reporting requirements. And I'll talk a little bit about the framework in a minute. So the comprehensive framework document, really this came out, this is kind of new to the HRB, and it came out of kind of understanding that clinical trials are different. They're different to the project awards, which typically HRB would also fund, or the career development type awards that HRB would fund. So we look to develop a comprehensive framework to ensure and to improve and ensure the quality of HRB funded clinical trials and infrastructures. So this framework is integral to HRB strategy, and it's designed to invest, to kind of guide the investment in research that delivers values and drives excellence, but also that builds a strong and supportive environment for healthcare research. The framework is developed to monitor performance and to include, improve and ensure the quality of HRB funded trials. So the framework was developed in partnership with a standing advisory group of international experts. So they provided input in terms of what the framework should look like, what it should do, and we have ongoing engagement with them to kind of track it and make sure the framework is fit for purpose. It includes a legal framework, so we've revised award contracts for clinical trials. So again, these are different to the project type awards that we would have. Fundamentally, they have the same terms and conditions, but there are also additional ones in relation to clinical trials and interventions. As part of the comprehensive framework, it's very much an integration and co-investment from hospitals and hospital group partners. Again, this is to ensure the integration of research and engagement of the hospitals and hospital groups within the overall research ecosystem. And we have engagement forums, which I'll come back to in a minute, which provide an opportunity for strategic engagement between the host institutions, the PIs, and the HRB. And then as part of the legal framework, we are revising the clinical trials policy. But a really new part of it is the inclusion of metrics as part of the enhanced monitoring and reporting. And these metrics are around clinical trial activity, but also looking at performance of the infrastructure itself. And so the monitoring and evaluation framework, as I said, is a new way of reporting for clinical trials and infrastructure awards. Aims to monitor performance, but also to improve communication and to promote an open dialogue with the HRB. And it gives us a much better idea of what's happening in awards. Because I think previously, I suppose I'm relatively new to HRB, but previously there are some legacy issues around what for the HRB to understand what was actually happening on the ground, what were the problems that people were experiencing, how were delays were impacting specifically on the clinical trials awards, problems with recruitment, and so kind of general problems that you always would associate with doing clinical trials. But there was never really an opportunity for HRB to kind of engage early and to understand what's happening and to try and resolve it and come up with joint solutions. So this framework really is designed to help in that process. So the evaluation framework has a number of components. So traditionally HRB reports were annual. So for clinical trials, intervention studies and infrastructures, we've moved to 6 monthly progress reports. So these reports are basically in 2 parts. There's a narrative progress report, and then there's reporting on metrics. There's also finance reports. So depending on the infrastructure, this is either through quarterly claims where you claim per quarter, or there's the traditional payment annual finance claim into HRB. For the infrastructure awards, we have the engagement forums. So these are high-level strategic meetings between senior representatives of HRB, the PIs, the host institutions, and the co-investors. So these really are opportunities for open dialogue at a very senior level. And the idea here is to kind of promote engagement, to promote that open discussion and provide an opportunity to discuss strategic issues that may be impacting on the infrastructures themselves. And then complementary to this, we would have regular operations level meetings where my team would meet with, for example, the program managers or the center managers and discuss operational issues. So at the moment, the big point of discussion is around metrics, because this is new to us and to the infrastructures. So again, kind of engagement at a different level, but really important that we understand what it's like on the ground. And then the remaining two parts are kind of part of the normal HRB oversight of awards. So that's an interim review and an end of grant report. But for us, this is an area that we're looking at to say, well, what will this look like for clinical trials, given that we will have a much more intense monitoring up to the kind of the midpoint and the end point. So we're kind of looking at that to say, well, what would that look like? What would be involved? More than likely a panel review of some sort. But again, it's something we're looking at. The awards, as I say, have just finished year one of a 5-year cycle. So it's kind of an opportunity for us to look at this early and get an idea of what would work for us and what would work for the applicants. So just in terms of the metrics, so this is kind of a busy slide, but I just thought I'd give you an overview of what the metrics look like. So these are metrics for the clinical trials activity. And the idea here is that we get an understanding of some of the critical points in operating and running clinical trials, and to give us a kind of an early indication of how it's working. Are there delays? And ultimately with the view to trying to understand it and trying to come up with solutions from a systems point of view, if necessary, with the wider stakeholder community. So the metrics are designed to look at startup speed and patient recruitment and retention, and then also some quality issues around data management and protocol compliance. So the startup speed is really looking at how long does it take to start up a study. And this is really critical, because if you have a kind of defined award for 3 years and it takes you 18 months to get started, it's obviously going to have an impact. But it's also looking at the systems within the infrastructures and are there ways that we could improve that startup process. Now we understand that there's lots of stakeholders involved in this process, so it's really an opportunity for us to understand who's involved, where the delays are, if there are delays. And then the other two are kind of linked to the startup, but slightly outside the control of the PI, and that's looking at ethics and how long it takes to get ethics and how long it takes to get regulatory approval. So the HPRA, that would be the regulatory body in Ireland. So again, understanding, and this is a really important point in terms of communication, because when the applicants kind of saw this, the first reaction was kind of, well, this is not something that we have control over. And absolutely 100% we know that, but it is a critical step in getting studies started up. So we wanted to understand what the norm is, and if there are delays, why are there delays? And so again, that's kind of information gathering for us. And it's really important to say that when people are reporting metrics, it's not a competitive situation. It's not saying, well, Center X has much faster startup times than Center Y, so therefore Center X is better. It's actually then looking deeper into that information and saying, well, why is that the case? Is there something that's in Center X that's not in Center Y that helps to facilitate these processes? So it's really about gathering information for us, understanding the system, but also ultimately looking at them as performance indicators. So the data management, the protocol compliance are kind of more long-term. So looking at kind of the quality of the data that's gathered or how it's managed, and then looking at protocol compliance. So how many people are actually getting the protocol defined treatments or interventions. So then the other side of it are the infrastructure metrics. So these are devised from the ESFRI working group, which are looking at a European level of getting metrics and understanding metrics for research infrastructures across Europe. So these are metrics then to understand how the infrastructure itself is performing. So the previous ones were looking at the clinical trial level, and these are looking at more at the infrastructure level. So they're kind of traditional metrics around research excellence. So number of grant proposals supported, publications, but also looking at training, looking at supporting industry interaction and economic activities, but also looking at outreach to the public, the data use, the provision of scientific advice, and the management of the centres themselves, and how are they managing. So these are very new, and we do understand that this is a new process, and again, the communication with the individual centres to kind of explain what we're looking at, where they came from. So as part of the rollout of this, we had meetings with the program managers or the centre managers of each of the infrastructure. So we had one with the CTN managers and the CRF managers and the cancer group managers, and really just explained where we're coming from, why we're collecting these, and re-emphasizing that it's not competitive, it's comparative. So we're looking to see what are the issues, what are the problems that they're facing on a system-wide basis. And that's really intelligence gathering for us, because it allows us then to go to, for example, our funder. So we get our funding from the Department of Health to say, look, this is an issue in the system. Potentially, we need more money to solve this, and here's the evidence. So it's really about gathering the evidence around the system. So in line with this, so the metrics are around for the specific infrastructures, but then for the DIFAs, which again are the funding scheme to support clinical trials and interventions, there's also an additional reporting requirement. So this is around kind of the startup, because we know and understand, particularly for academic-led studies, that there are delays and this can be a torturous process in trying to get studies up and running. So as part of, for the DIFA awards, there's also some additional reporting requirements. So this is approval, one is an approvals package. So this is where, so it's mandatory to register the study. So as soon as possible, we ask for the registration number just to kind of confirm that it's been registered. We look for sponsor details. We look for the approved study protocol. Now we recognize that this is a bit of a moving target. So it's really what the ethics committee has approved. And that's really just to kind of show us that the process is moving on. We don't review the protocol, we don't review anything, we don't have that expertise. So it's really about understanding that the processes are moving forward. Research governance is really important for clinical trials. So we look for information around the trial management oversight, what committees have been established, have they been established, who's on them, and then confirmation of when the approvals come in. So we ask for that to be submitted as soon as that information is available. Then the next step is the first patient first visit. So we're asked to be notified of that, and then ask for a 3-month recruitment update once the recruitment phase of the study is up and running. So just to give you an idea of the kind of timeline of reporting. So this is for an example, just for a 4-year DIFA award. So as you can see at the start, we ask for the approval package as soon as possible, but before the first patient is enrolled. Then we ask for notification of first patient first visit, and then the 3-month recruitment report. And then after that, the biannual reports kick in, and they come in every March and September and reflect the 2 periods of the year. So January to June, and then July to December, and they come in then in March and September every year. The annual reports then come in with a finance report once a year. And then there's an end of grant report, which, as I said, is something that we're looking at. So you can see from this that there is quite a lot. It's much more intensive monitoring. But we're trying to kind of make the process as easy as possible for people. It's all new. We're literally only in the first, we've just received the first biannual reports from all of our infrastructures and DIFA awards. So we're kind of looking at them at the moment. So in terms of the progress reports themselves, so again, these are biannual. They include financial reporting, which is provided in a specific template. And so we're looking at progress essentially. So what did you say you do in your award, and where are you with that? And we ask for information on governance, activity on the project itself, and then specifics around the individual metrics. So we've developed a bespoke template for these, which is similar to the standard HRB reporting template, but it's designed specifically for this as part of the monitoring framework. So as I said, in terms of research governance for clinical trials, it's really, really important, because it sets the standard for good quality research and also safeguards the public. So we're not prescriptive here in terms of we say you must have A, B, C, or D. So we do say that the research governance structures must be appropriate to the complexity and the level of risk that the study has. So it's really important to understand the institutional kind of appetite for risk and how the institution or the sponsor kind of looks at it, and then appropriate governance structures are in place. And that's something that we would kind of not be prescriptive about, but we just want to make sure that an appropriate governance structure is in place, and that it's reported. And this includes a regular reporting on the governance and management activities within the award. And we look for what committees have been established, who are the members, what are the terms of reference of those committees, who is the chair, for example, particularly if it needs to be an independent chair. And then we ask if there's any changes to the structures or the membership, that we're notified of that. And then we can also ask for minutes and agendas for meetings. Now, again, this isn't to interfere as such, but it's just to understand what are the issues, what are people talking about, if there are issues that have been experienced within the trial, how were they dealt with, what was the decision-making process, who made those decisions. So it's really to understand what's happening within the trials themselves. So as I said before, the awards will have interim reviews and an end of award report. What that actually looked like is something we're working on. Traditionally for HRB grants, the reporting of impact has been kind of separate to the reward management itself, but obviously we want to include that in terms of reporting. We do ask for kind of key outputs as part of the progress reports, but actually looking at specific impact is something that we want to do. It's kind of an interesting area because we are looking at impact as a whole and saying, well, what is it? What does it mean? Who does this benefit? Who is it important to? And looking at impact in its broadest sense. So it's a kind of a body of work that we're looking at the moment in terms of capturing that, because we do understand for clinical trials in particular that the impacts can be medium or even long term. So just to summarize, really, like from a funder's perspective, open communication is really, really important. And we see awards as a partnership, really, because it's in our interest that you succeed. And we want you to succeed. So it's really important for us to kind of view this as a partnership. And critically, I think in terms of reporting, a key message is around, like, don't tell us what you think we want to hear, because oftentimes that kind of can hide some of the issues that are, happening behind the scenes. And we have a mantra really around clinical trials and infrastructures about no surprises. So we don't like surprises. So we want to hear about it. We want to work with people. We've set up structures that kind of promote open communication at different levels, and we're very keen for that to happen in practice. Having said that, we're very open to engaging with people outside of those kind of formal communication platforms, and so we're always available for people to contact us to ask questions, be it myself or the project officers within the team. So that's it really from a HRB perspective. And I think